Uh, so we will be recording this if you get the notification. Hello, everyone. I am Ana Pineda. I am the current moderator of the Binalot Talks alongside with my co-moderators, Arturo Tablan, JJ, and also Ara Espigar, whose username is E Espigar. So for those who are not familiar with the Binalot Talks, it's a weekly talk hosted by the Archaeological Studies program, and we gather people from different fields to give us lectures or to give discussions about various information that they are focused in. We encourage different fields to give us talks so we can get more ideas and we can have a discussion going on. Before I start, I will give some announcements. I think there was an email recently from Dr. Lee Neri, the director of the Archaeological Studies program, to please file your LOAs before Friday, May 14th. All right. And I think we have our speaker here. But before we go to the introductions, let me call the person who will introduce the speaker and who kindly told us about the speaker's wonderful ideas and the talk that he will be giving today. Elle Lim.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So allow me to introduce our speaker this afternoon or evening, Kevin Chavez Laksamana. He is a Filipino-Canadian sociocultural anthropologist, and his main research program and training focus since 2015 is on comparative gender and or transgender queer studies in Southeast Asia, including Indonesia, Singapore, and the Philippines. Recently, he completed his master's program on the quote-unquote disrupted life cycles of Balinese and Singaporean transgender women sex workers by analyzing their diverse experiences and stories of transitioning and detransitioning. This includes histories of hormone therapies and sexual reassignment surgeries, participation in beauty and or sex work, religion, romantic and familiar relationships, concept of national belonging, and death. Data for this research was gathered during his ethnographic fieldwork in the region in the summer of 2017, in partnership with Project X Singapore and Yayasan Gaya Dewata from Bali, Indonesia. In 2018, he was a visiting scholar and fellow with the chair in transgender studies and the transgender archives at the University of Victoria. In 2020, he was named as one of Alberta's top 30 under 30 for 2020. This is an annual award and campaign by the Alberta Council for Global Cooperation, ACGC, featuring 30 outstanding young people nominated by their community and selected by committee of peers for their commendable work in making the world a more just, fair, and sustainable place for all. So Kevin is currently completing his PhD studies. He's now in his second year at the University of Alberta. His doctoral research looks at Filipino food and quote-unquote diasporic homecoming in Edmonton and New York City. He is an award-winning educator and currently teaches at Northwest College in Canada and the University of the Philippines, Baguio. Again, let us all welcome Kevin Chavez Laksamana.
Hi, thank you, Elle, and everyone for inviting me. Is it okay if I do it in Taglish? Yes. So yeah, I am gonna share my screen, I think, and then we're gonna start the fun. So hi, my name is Kevin, and thank you, Elle, for inviting me and for introducing me to Anna and Ara, and now I'm here. So yeah, I recently completed my master's 2 weeks ago, and I will present to you yung kalahati ng master's project, which I've been working on since, well, the project started in my undergrad, where I started looking at Filipino trans women particularly sa beauty pageant scene. But then the project grew into something different. After the undergrad, I continued my master's and started looking at anthropology of tourism and sex work sa Asia. But then I added my email there just in case people want to connect after. And if you want to, you can find all of my work in my personal website. Just so you can contact me after if you want to. And I just wanted to say that I'm really glad to be here. As a Filipino based in Canada, hindi palagi na yung audience are actually Filipinos. So I don't know, it is quite exciting that this year I get to teach with UP Baguio, and then I get to connect with my own community that are based sa Pinas. So it's really an exciting year for me. Yeah, let's start with the lecture. So this is the image that the organizers used for the poster, and this was an image that I took during my fieldwork, and I used it for a competition. It got into semifinals, and I titled it Bunga. In Balinese or in Bahasa Indonesia, bunga means flower. So I don't know, when you guys think of Indonesia, what do you, I know, what is the first thing that comes to mind? You can put it in the chat, you can unmute your microphone. Yeah, anything. What do you, ano yung unang, what I don't know, comes to mind when you think about Bali specifically in Indonesia? Yes, tourism. One thing that comes to mind when it comes to sa Bali is yung Eat, Pray, Love. The book by Elizabeth, I don't remember her last name, but it's that book. That's the first thing that comes to mind. But when you are a sociocultural anthropologist, Bali is actually important. When that's where Gregory Bateson did his early works, Margaret Mead. So part of the reason why I went to Bali in Indonesia is, again, my supervisor, Gregory Forth, who has been working sa Indonesia for the last 40 years, but also because I wanted to see what's in there. One thing for this lecture that I want to point out is that I will not be talking about Singapore this time, which is my other field site. The project is a comparative study of trans women sex workers in Singapore and Bali. But for the sake of time, I will just be talking about my Balinese subjects. Afternoon there and night here. So yeah, rice terraces too. They are quite beautiful in Bali. So just like anyone who does research sa gender and sexuality fields, I usually start my presentations with my definitions. I think it's important as a researcher na nalalaman ng audience where they're coming from, especially their perspectives and bias. So these are the definitions that I will be using and I will be referring throughout the presentation. But I also added a link at the top of the slide where you can find more definitions. The thing about gender research is that the language is very dynamic and it changes a lot. So you need to keep up with the literature. But for the sake of this presentation tonight, these are the definitions and terminologies that I will be using. So transgender, umbrella term for people whose gender identity or gender expression differs from what is typically associated with the sex they were assigned at birth. Transsexual, on the other hand, mas older term siya, and it originated in the medical and psychological communities. For some, though, they still prefer the word transsexual to refer to themselves. However, the most important thing about the difference between the two is that transsexual is not an umbrella term. Transgender is the umbrella term for, for these individuals. And then the other one that I wanted to highlight and mention is the difference between cross-dresser and drag queen. So cross-dresser, they are usually men, heterosexual, sometimes gay, who wear clothes, makeup, and accessories culturally associated with women. And for many, it's considered derogatory and it replaces the old term transvestite. Tapos drag queen, as we all know, I'm not sure if you guys are following RuPaul's Drag Race, are male, often gay performer who exaggerates female behaviors and dresses for the purposes of entertainment. And some drag queens might identify as transgender. So those are the first four terms, and then for my project and for this presentation, we will be specifically talking about trans women. So a trans woman is an individual who was assigned male at birth, but identifies and lives as a woman. And specifically for this lecture, I will be talking about the Warias of Indonesia. So interestingly, sa Indonesia, they have a term for trans women, which is waria. So it's an Indonesian term for trans women, derived from combining the words wanita, which means woman, and priya, which means man. For my Singaporean subjects, just for your interest, they don't have a specific term for trans woman, but the closest that na term that I find while working in there is agua. But when you translate it, it's still loose. So if you translate agua, it means change gender. So it's not specifically about transgender individuals and trans women, but it's the closest that I can find while working in Singapore. Actually, the interest in language stems from my fellowship with the Chair in Transgender Studies, where I am trying to document or look when the term trans women or transgender started. So my work in the Chair in Transgender Studies and the Transgender Archives for the couple of years is looking at the Transvestia journals by Virginia Prince. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the name, but those are the first journals about trans women or transgender in the United States. So I am looking at all the journals and looking when the word transgender first started showing up in the literature. Because I think when it comes to gender studies and sexuality studies and queer studies, language is important because of translation, transmission, and transfer, and how people, especially different cultures, adapt to their needs when it comes to categories and how they identify themselves. So my main research question is, what does it mean to live a nonlinear or disrupted life course? And then my probing questions are, when circumstances deny someone's existence because of their gender and profession, by what means do people reconstruct their lives, reclaim their identities and sense of being, and gather the strength to survive their daily hardships? So those are the guiding questions for the research. So this is what I did and how I approach the research, because I am studying their life course. It is broken down into 6 sections, and for today I will just be giving a brief overview for each of the sections. But this is the actual titles of the project. So yeah, so I started the project looking at transitioning as the starting point, and looking at old age and death, or detransitioning as yung parang final section of the project, which we will talk about later. So this is a quote by Professor Tom Belstorff. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar. His work is in Indonesia on gay Indonesians, but also he's writing about Warias as well. Um, I just thought I'd start with this quote because this is something that I've noticed during my field work, and in some ways I am my research. I always try to have like a call action to go back to responsible anthropology, because as much as anthropology is good and brings so many good things, it can be exploitative in so many ways. But yeah, I will talk more about that later. But I just thought I'll share this quote and the misconceptions about ethnography as well. So for my data for this project, it's 9 weeks being in the field, living with the people, participant observation. I did semi-structured, in-depth interviews for from 1 hour to 2 hours or longer, and then participant observation. So during my time in there, I tried to participate as much as I can with the communities that I work with. There are actually 28 interviews for the project. Three are in Singapore, and 25 are in Bali, not 23. Sorry for the typo. I did interview trans men as well, and we are hoping to write a paper about trans men as well, coming out from this project. And I also interviewed what I call miscellaneous. So those are community leaders, filmmakers, psychologists, and academics that are in the field or that are in the region when I when I went there. As for theory and my approach, the way that I analyzed my data is bottom up with grounded theory in mind. So I let the data speak for itself. And then I did a cross-cultural thematic analysis. And some of the theories that I used for this project are rites of passage, if you know about Van Gennep. And fortunately, there is another researcher whose work on trans women is also, I know they are also employing rites of passage, and that's Anne Boleyn's study with uh, with what she calls transsexuals back then because of the time. And then I am also employing Gay Becker's Disrupted Lives, um, liminality theory, and performativity theory by Judith Butler. As I am coming from the West, and all of my anthropological and my education is coming from Canada, I made sure that that I talk to the knowledge gatekeepers and that my research is actually guided by the community. Because as much as I am Asian, I am still considered an outsider in some contexts because I am, bringing the Western perspective when I study this individual. So it took months to build those relationships, especially in sociocultural anthropology, where you have to live with them. So I made sure that I am guided by the community themselves. So I work with Project X Singapore Project X in Singapore, and I work with Yayasan Gaya Dewata in Denpasar, Bali, Indonesia. Um, And just like any research is expensive. I just wanted to thank all of my funders and supporters for this project. Let's start. The first chapter that actually looks at these individuals in the study is titled "In the Beginning: Disruptions, Transitions, and Transformations." So this is a quote from, as I've mentioned, I'm not going to talk much about Singapore, but I pulled this quote from one of my Singaporean interviewees, and Selena said, "I came from a very conservative family. I'm a Muslim. And it would take a lot of courage to declare who you are as a person. And then you can't just walk like that. Cross dressing, you know, it takes a lot of courage, and people are name calling me. So there wasn't much support. I didn't want to let my mother down. There was a lot of guilt, so it wasn't an easy process. So when it comes to transitioning, um, at this point in time in history, we have entered a time where a lot of people, especially those who identify as transgender, transition more than ever. Um, for a lot of them, transitioning is likened to a rebirth where they can finally live their true gender in the public sphere. So it is much different compared to the experiences of those who were coming out as transgender before. Um, as previous and current data suggest, including my data, for a lot of these individuals, early transitioning is the norm. So it can be as easy as, or not easy, as growing your hair or putting makeup or wearing dresses. So for some of my participants, that's when they started transitioning. Um, For some of them, they are taking hormone therapies or doing facial feminization surgery. So FFS, facial feminization surgery, is the bone slash tissue reconstruction. So they will have a softer feminine look. For a lot of them, especially they are coming from, underprivileged families and communities. They are getting access when it comes to hormones, bumibili sila sa black market, or sometimes if they have a friend in their local pharmacy, they pay that nurse friend or anyone who works there for them to get access to hormones. And a lot of them are from my interviews, at least most of them are using birth control pills. In Indonesia, they call it kabi. Tapos, other forms of transitioning stop surgery, that's when they are changing their upper body, or, breast augmentation, or putting implants or silicone to have that shape. And then the magnum opus for some of these individuals is the bottom surgery. That is the sexual realignment surgery, because of the concept that you fulfill the requirement of being a woman by having a vagina. So those are some transitioning methods that I talk about in the study, and that people shared with me. However, when it comes to transitioning, and I think a lot of people are still misunderstanding the process, that transitioning doesn't happen overnight. When someone or an individual decides to transition, that is a lifelong process. And their journey is individual to themselves, and it is very unique. Their experiences are very unique from other trends, especially when you look geographically where the community is located. So while there are differences when it comes to their processes and their journeys, the ultimate outcome is to be treated, recognized, and respected as a woman in the course of their everyday life. So this is the beginning of the life course that I wanted to talk about in this project. When it comes to theory, as I mentioned, I am employing rites of passage by Van Gennep. I'm not sure if any of you heard about this theory, but it's one of the popular theory when it comes to sociocultural anthropology and even sociology. So this scheme is a multilateral model which accounts for the ordering and patterning of the ceremonial life. So because it's quite an old theory. So it originally talks about the ceremonial lives of quote unquote non-technologically complex people in which it encompasses biological and status change. So I just thought that it is very poignant and very related to the people that I'm studying. So this is the theory that I am employing throughout the project. So when you apply it to the lives of these trans women, to these Warias, the rites of passage is their departure from the male birth persona and their entrance to their quote unquote true women gender role and identity. And if you remember from intro to anthropology or your anthropological theory, rites of passage have three steps or three rites. So first one being the rite or rites of separation. So when you talk about separation, it's the symbolic removing of an individual life from a previous world, their previous world or life they occupy. So when you apply it to these individuals, it's their removal from their former world as male slash men. And then the second one is the rite or rites of transition. So rites of transition is the liminal threshold wherein an individual prepares for their reunion or reintegration back into the society after separation. So when we look at these individuals, this is where they shift. This is where they prepare and socialize, trying to learn their new status role. With the hopes of being accepted as a woman. Um, and then the third one is the right or rights of incorporation. So that is a form of social return for these individuals. It might be their group or their village or their family, where they were physically and symbolically removed. So it's just a full circle. So when you think about rights of incorporation, that's when they do some of the surgeries. Again, the conversion of the penis to a neo vagina as a requirement of being a woman. For some, that's their goal and the ultimate goal. So they will be accepted. But for some, it's just like acceptance instead of just being tolerated. So that's the main theory for the study. And the other one that I employed throughout the project is Gay Becker's Disrupted Lives. It is very similar, but I argue that Gay Becker acknowledges that yung central piece of place of disruption, yung central place ng disruption and discontinuity sa life course ng individual. So what I argue with my data is that transitioning is disruption for these individuals. And a lot of these individuals, they start the disruption slash transitioning is with their body. And Becker argues that, when you look at disruption in the lives of individuals, you actually start with the body. So the body is the starting point because that's where it's what you use for practices of everyday life, because the argument that body creates culture and culture affects the life course where continuity or discontinuity occurs. So it's quite similar to rites of passage. There is a disruption itself, a period of limbo and liminality, and a period of life reorganization. So it is very similar to the rites of passage scheme by Van Gennep and Bolin. So I just had them in the study side by side. But the main argument for these is that, transitioning is more than a simple switch. It is becoming. So that was the main argument for why these individuals are transitioning. Again, it's not just it's not an overnight change. It takes years and years, or even a lifetime, to actually become or live their true identity and gender. One thing that I'm also interested in, and it stems from my undergrad research as well, with Filipino trans women beauty pageant career queens, is the profession when it comes to these individuals. As we are following their life course, of course, having a source of income is important. So this is a quote from, again, one of my interviewees. And I just like throwing quotes from the actual project because I don't know, it gives life to the data. Um, and again, I'm a qualitative researcher. That's why I work with narratives. So I just wanted to share this quote. And Vera said, I don't blame the transgender sex workers. Maybe there are a couple of reasons that's why they do it. Maybe they don't have a choice or job, or they don't have any choice on the money, and they don't have enough education. But for me, sometimes also the transgender who has high education also still go to the street as a sex worker. Maybe because they need not only money, but they have other needs. They feel satisfied with a customer from there. So there's many kind of reason of that one. But I have a lot of friends. I don't blame them. That's up to them. So part of the project too is looking at informal labor economies. As some of you mentioned, when you think about Bali, you think about tourism. So that was also the starting point for me, because it is different from other communities where researchers study trans women or transgender individuals. Bali and Singapore, both of them are tourist destinations. So I was interested with the intertwining concepts when it comes to gender, tourism, and sex work. Um, but also because labor economies, be it formal or informal, are sites for power negotiations and performances, and including oppression. This is, for a lot of them, their first experience of being discriminated against or being oppressed, to whatever extent that is. So the beauty pageant piece for this one again actually stemmed from my undergrad thesis, but also it stemmed from my background too. My mom is a stylist, a hairstylist and a makeup artist. So growing up, I was brought into that world. I always say that, like, here, if Super Bowl is their holiday where everyone is right in front of TV ordering food, and just it is a family thing. For my household, it's the Miss Universe pageant. So that's when everyone is in front of TV, and my mom will give commentaries and all that stuff, as if she's a judge, because that's her career and life revolved around. So that was my first introduction to the concept of beauty pageants. So the when it comes to beauty pageant, the idea is that these individuals are just ordinary individuals, and it is similar with just the women pageants, where the concept of how do I say this, of someone ordinary becoming a winner. So for a lot of these individuals that I studied in and I work with in Singapore, and particularly in Bali, the concept of exposing one's beauty is something that came up a lot. Um, and also it is putting their own version of femininity on display. As you guys remember, in 2018, um, which I think people will not easily forget, because that's when Catriona Gray of the Philippines won Miss Universe, is that the organization allowed Miss Spain Angela Ponce to compete in in the pageant, but that is not the actually the first time that it happened. Because in 2012 there was a transgender woman that participated in the national pageant of Miss Universe Canada, Jenna Talakova, which if she won, they will allow her to compete. So Angela was the first one who got into the Miss Universe stage, but Jenna Talakova of Canada actually propelled for it to happen. She did not win Miss Universe Canada, but she advocated it during that year, wrote letters to the organization that paved the way for trans women to join beauty pageants, especially Miss Universe. So when I talk about informal labor economies, the first one that they actually join are beauty pageants. Second one is sex work. Sex work, again, I am interested with the intertwining concepts of tourism and sex work, but also sex workers as a community when it comes to transgender individuals. Hindi sila yung first group na I thought that I will study. I thought that I will study beauty pageant career queens and continue my undergrad research, but I was um, I was shocked. I think maybe as someone who was brought up in a Filipino household in Canada, beauty pageants is a big thing with our culture. But one thing that I've noticed in Singapore and including Indonesia, hindi siya kasing laki when it comes to the Filipino community and queer community. So most of my interviewees, without me knowing and without me expecting, are actually sex workers. So so that's why I ended up actually working with a lot of sex workers when I was doing my fieldwork. But their sex work is diverse, just like any sex work community. So it is very diverse and it vary greatly in setting, in power, risks, and rewards, including socioeconomic status. For some of them, this is also how they first learn to live as a trans woman individual. Kasi they actually find mentors or from older sex workers that will teach them how to pass as a woman, have relationships with men, or even just living their everyday life. So they while there is discrimination and prejudice about sex work, and more specifically trans women sex workers, for a lot of them this is actually a form of socialization. So I had a question from the chat. What is your stand with transgender in a pageantry? I will answer the question at the Q&A if that's okay. But yeah, sex work. I ended up, well, I think most 90% of my interviewees are actually sex workers. So we ended up just shifting the focus from wanting to study beauty pageant queens to sex workers. And yeah, there will be a lot more stories about sex workers as we progress. And then I'm not sure if you guys are watching RuPaul's Drag Race. Yes? No? So one thing that came up a lot during my interviews is the concept of a showgirl. So a lot of them don't use the word drag queen, but from the way that they describe themselves, they are drag queen, but they are using the term showgirl. So we've decided to look more at drag queens, and it is also another source of income for them. And sometimes when you talk about sex work, you have to talk about sex work in relation to drag shows because they go hand in hand. And I'm not sure if I added a quote about sex work and drag queen. I don't remember my slide deck, but a lot of them actually mixes them together because some of them find clients while they are doing drag, and some of them learn about drag while they are working as sex workers. So these are the main three informal labor economies that I've encountered throughout the project. Um, and there are a few others in there, but these are the main three that I did study while I was in there and that I was writing about since 2015. And then, of course, as we progress through the life course, we cannot forget about, kinship. So I was interested on how transgender individuals, especially in Indonesia, look and find love. So this is another quote from Corey, from one of my interviewees. Her name is Corey, and she said, "Love is important because even though we are transgender is also a human who has a feeling." So in 2011, actually, there was a documentary that came out, and I was able to talk to the director while I was in there. And the title of the documentary is Tales of the Warias. I think it was, don't quote me on this, I may be wrong, but I think it was supported by PBS. And it actually looks at how Warias in Indonesia, I'm not sure if I don't remember if they actually talk about Balinese Warias, look for love. And this is one of the quotes or movie or lines from that documentary. And this is from a wife of the husband slash swami of a Waria, and she said, "Someone asked me if I ever get jealous of Mamiria. Why would I get jealous if I never get jealous?" So Mamiria is the Waria, and then Pak Ansar is the swami slash husband, and this is the wife talking about Mamiria and Pak Ansar. Okay, I'll start again. Someone asked me if I ever get jealous of Mamiria. Why would I get jealous if I never got jealous when Pakansar was with other women? Why would I be jealous of Mamiria, whose heart and actions I know so well? She wouldn't have the heart to hurt me. I ask you, what is there to be jealous of? Nothing. So that is a good preamble to how these individuals look for love and maintain their kinship relations. So for a lot of them, just like in the Philippines, for a lot of non-binary and queer Filipinos, a lot of them, a lot of the Warias actually seek romance in the form of long-term boyfriends. And as I mentioned, swamis, that's the term. They retain or try to retain their male partners or their relationships by giving them something financially or supporting them or showering them with gifts, which is a common common thing with the community. So that's how they try to retain excuse me their partners. When I was in there, iPhone 6 was the the most expensive iPhone back there. And then one of my interviewees said the most expensive one for me, and she's talking about gifts, is iPhone 6, which is much more expensive than the one I use. I use a cheap phone, but I give my husband an expensive one. So she was telling me how, she is using a cheap phone, but she bought an expensive phone for her boyfriend slash husband. So they will stay, and some of them even buy motorbike for their partners. But from my interviews, a lot of them just provide food every day or some pocket money throughout the week. So that's how they show love and also try to retain their boyfriends. One thing that we also find, because again, in connection to tourism, is how Warias look for sponsors. So when I said sponsor, those are individuals that will help them pay for their surgeries if they decide to, or for those individuals that, you know, in the hopes that they will marry them and then they will get them out of poverty and out of the country, because this country is being, you know, a member of the LGBT is still criminalized. So that's what I mean when I talk about sponsors. A lot of them mentioned though language barrier is a problem when it comes to looking for sponsors, especially through sex work, because not a lot of them can speak English. Um, so they said that is one of the main problem on why they are having issues talking or looking for sponsors. And then one thing that they often mention, and again, I think this is rooted with the communities that I work with, because they are very tightly knit, is the importance of the communities. Um, so they mentioned that, you know, so solidarity is equals to support, equal to resilience. So a lot of them, it is through their community that they learn how to survive, be it just as a trans woman or as a sex worker, because a lot of them were abandoned and estranged from their family. So they were telling me that, you know, this is where they found acceptance through their communities. And then this is the last analysis chapter or analysis aspect of the project is detransitioning. This is actually an interesting one because not a lot of researchers when it comes to trans are talking about detransitioning because it's a hot topic. And when I say hot topic, because this is used by a lot of anti-trans to delegitimize the existence of these individuals. So even writing this chapter or this paper that we are hoping to publish this year, we are trying to be very careful with the data and treating it with utmost care and respect because this is a contentious topic. So this is another quote from the research. And Cindy said, I am afraid that nobody will take care of me when I die for the ceremony. I worry that my family will not take care of me. The cremation and ceremony itself is very expensive and my family cannot afford it. I have no savings and I have no children. I have no one responsible for that. For Balinese, it's also who will come to your ceremony when you die. So I'm not sure if you guys have heard about the concept of detransitioning, but the concept of detransitioning is the cessation or reversal of a transgender identification or gender transition, be it socially, legally, and or medically. So this is a very fairly new aspect of trans research. Not much literature is available on it. Much of the data is coming from clinician perspectives, social media and blogs, in news outlets, and the focus is very Western and very white. So, as such, you know, this research is often lacking, especially for Southeast Asian individuals, and this aspect of research is often, you know, met with contention, and you see why. So, but again, yeah, the issue is it's very limited on anecdotal evidence and personal testimonies, often anti-trans. But there are two perspectives that I found working with these individuals. Is that the first perspective is that a lot of these individuals, especially Warias, are detransitioning because of external factors or reasons beyond their control. So they are left with no choice. That's why they decide to detransition. And even though they detransition, there is also the possibility of retransitioning, which is another term. And then the other one is often connected to the anecdotal evidence is that there are actually detransitioners who are stopping to identify as trans. So they just decide that one day gender dysphoria is still there. So, they will stop their hormone therapies or whatever, remove their implants, and they will just stop identifying as transgender. However, for a lot of these individuals, retransitioning is also possible. So for both retransitioning is possible. Sorry, the term is a mouthful. But for my subjects, um, they fall under the first perspective. It is because of old age, religion and faith, and death. Old age is that they are getting sick, as you've seen from Cindy, and they don't have money to pay for the expenses, so they are trying to go back and be accepted by their family. And the idea is that if they will live as a male/man, they will be accepted. The other one is religion and faith. I think someone from the chat mentioned Hinduism earlier, but as some of you know, Indonesia is a Muslim country, and then Balinese are Hindus. So a lot of them still consider themselves and their bodies, as as the holy temple. So they wanted, if they die, they wanted to go back to God as their male form, during when they were born. So as a male. And then that is in connection with death. So funeral rites, and a lot of these stories, and often heartbreaking, I'm not gonna lie, is that, they don't have a choice, but they don't want to embarrass their family on their deathbeds. So I think most of them, that was their answer, is because they want to still be accepted by their family, and they just don't want to embarrass them, even though they are abandoned by them. So that is very different from the detransitioning articles that you find from the internet, that usually falls on the second perspective. But for these individuals, they are detransitioning because of external factors that are beyond their control. Um, So another quote, talking about the future, and moving and looking forward. And she said, "Of course, I want transgender to be accepted in society, especially looking for jobs and being in school. There will be no stigma or discrimination, no bullying. I also hope that there are no generalizations. The mistake of one is not the mistake of the whole community." So just to conclude, so these are the three confessions. Hopefully I'm not going over time, but anthropology and queer studies, a call to action. Anthropology, as I mentioned, through ethnographic work and activism, can actually expose inequalities that can yield positive results, and we have seen that before. I think the role of anthropologists is not just to simply tell stories. I think anthropology and um, I think we are just trained storytellers, anthropologists, regardless of your field. But I think the challenge is to actually let our imagination expand, and continue to advocate for justice or social justice of many individuals, like the transgender individuals and other racialized and oppressed communities that need and deserve it. And we actually need to encourage, especially the younger anthropologists, to do responsible anthropology. A lot of these communities, when I went there, some of them actually do not want to entertain me because they were telling me that, a lot of researchers go there with no post-research follow-up, and they were feeling used. So I always tell my students that, we are telling the stories of these individuals right now, but the goal is to actually, in the future, that it is them that will be telling their stories and not through us. So we are, in some ways, anthropologists and anthropology as a scaffold. And then the second conclusion is the concept of self-identity gender as a spectrum, which we all know. So this research and other research, it illustrates an important cultural concept of gender. It is a category and subject position. That has existed years ago. And it is just only garnering attention now by slapping a modern name. Even the babaylans of the Philippines, a lot of them are actually male. There are male babaylans. When governments and politicians talk about transgender individuals, they are talking about these individuals as if it's just a fad. It's not. There is actually cross-cultural data that exists years and years ago about these individuals, and it is just garnering controversy right now because of its name. Um, and then the third one is the recreation of oneself. So trans women are a product of different historical relations of power / resistance through they create and recreate themselves. So when we talk about transgender individuals, we have to consider which geographical location we are talking about, because a lot of the experience is molded by colonization, religion, including globalization. So this research and any other research actually illustrates that different societies have different ways of organizing their thinking when it comes to sex, gender, and society. And I think I've mentioned this to my students too. The question of anthropology is what it means to be a human being, but I think we know how to be a human being, and I think we need to reframe the question of anthropology, where is home? Because I think that's what we are trying to answer. So we have to, that's just my opinion, that we have to reframe the question of anthropology to questions and concepts of belonging and acceptance. And through this research, I hope that there will be growth when it comes to research and exploration on the lives of trans men, because I have noticed that it is good. The literature and data, there's a lot about trans women, but not so much about trans men. So I wish that in the next few years there will be more studies on the lives of trans men, just so we can look at the transgender experience and its intricacies as a whole, and we understand all of its aspects. So that is my talk. Thank you again for inviting me. And I added my contact information there just in case people want to have a chat after.
Again, thank you, Kevin, for that very interesting talk. I like that you included the Vanganet, the transition, the rites of passage, which is something that a lot of anthropologists are actually surprisingly getting into right now. They're rediscovering this this book. So even in archaeology, it's also one of the researches that people are getting into. I think there are I have some questions of my own. I mentioned as well on the chat that you can put your questions on the chat, or you can direct message either me or Arturo, JJ, for your so we can read it out loud. But for now, I'll read this question out loud from Ray Mart Lapina. So, is there any case that one of the reasons why an individual decided to transition is because of job opportunity, for example, in sex work? That's a very interesting question.
That is actually a good question. So, some of them, there are a few individuals, and I'm just trying to remember from memory, that they actually don't want to do any surgeries. They were like, I identify as a woman, that's enough for me. But some of the sex workers that I find is that, that I talked to, they were telling me that, what, it will be easier for my job if I actually have, a vagina. Because they don't have it, and they were telling me about the kinks of the different clients and the customers and whatnot, that they are actually hurt by the actions or by the fantasies of their clients because they don't have the vagina. And if if they don't have the vagina, you know where they will go for the intercourse or the sexual act. So a lot of them, some of them actually are deciding to do the surgeries or do implants just so they will earn more because they will be paid more if they have breasts or if they have a neo vagina. So yeah, there are actually a few of those individuals that I talked to, but there is an interesting comment from one of my interviewees, and if I remember her, it was Sherry, and she said that people sometimes think they are blinded by transitioning, that it will um, that it will end their suffering if they actually fully pass. And she said that, like, we have to remember that, um, even though, say, you did all of the transitioning procedures, and the magnum opus for a lot of them is the neo vagina, that discrimination will still be there, regardless. So yeah, to answer your question, TLDR, yes, there are a few individuals that actually do the surgeries for a better job opportunity or to earn more.
Um, I guess there might be other questions, but actually I wanted to circle back to that concept, because if they wanted uh, to transition because of job opportunity, um, and I guess this is also associated with my question. When you mentioned earlier that some of the sex workers were abandoned, but you also mentioned that there were some people who were, or at least by hearsay, there were people who were practicing sex workers. However, they're in a higher, you would say, it was mentioned it was higher education. Am I correct? According, okay, so I theoretically that means that they are outside of poverty, but were they abandoned in your research for the Warias? Were they abandoned by families because of poverty, or because of their being trans women, or what's the what's the numbers, I guess, or what's the the higher possibility that it happens?
Yeah, a lot of them are abandoned because again they are Waria. So a lot of them, estrangement and abandonment started when they were young, and because they were abandoned by their families, they don't have a home to go to. They lived in the streets, and that's when they started doing sex work in order. So parang survival mode sila. So they actually, a lot of them started sex work because they don't have a home to go to, and they see the street as their playing ground. And and a lot of these individuals are actually street sex workers. There were a few ones in Singapore, and now I mentioned my Singapore subjects, where there are brothels there, where that's where they do sex work. But for a lot of my Waria subjects, they are actually street sex workers. So they were abandoned when they were young, and then they are, that's when they learn sex work. But then there are also these individuals who are actually doing sex work because they find happiness and fulfillment by doing it. They were like, I actually feel like a woman because I am having intercourse with a man. So so there are different aspects to it. But yeah, a lot of them were abandoned when they were young. There are a few ones that were not abandoned. And the strategies that they were telling me is, they are bringing Maria friends to show that, like, uh, it's not bad at all. There are Marias that are thriving. So they are showing their parents that, identifying as one doesn't necessarily mean negative or bad. So that is one of the strategies that they do. And there are even horror stories where, sometimes they will put them in, like, chicken cages once they mention that they are Waria, tapos papausukan sila or something like that. Or
That's a familiar. I guess a
yeah,
lot of people are familiar with that punishment. That's
yeah.
what you're.
So those are some of the stories that were mentioned. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. That was a good thing to think about. I think there's another question, Arturo.
Yes, I believe there's a question from Ma'am Aya Ragragrio. Pardon my pronunciation there. But yeah, she thanks you for your talk, and she asks that she wants to know if you were able to explore how Warias were related slash situated within the broader tradition of gender shifting in Indonesia, such as with the Bante among the Wana and the Kalabay and Bisu of the Bugis.
Yeah, good question. I actually did, again, my undergrad thesis was at transgender Filipino and Indonesian beauty pageant queen. So I actually did talk about these things in my project. So yeah, they are very related. And you know, Bugis is a good example. Um, Now I feel like I need to read my undergrad research again. Um, but yeah, they are. I don't want to give wrong information, but they are very related to those ones. So I did mention in my undergrad thesis is that you know this subject position actually existed pre-colonially. You know, when in the Philippines, Babaylan, and I think the one thing that that I did use for my Indonesian subject are actually the bases. Um, and yeah, yeah, and let's have a chat after this one. I don't want to give wrong information, but yes, they are.
That's actually a very good question because I was also I wanted to ask what's the historical relations of the Warias and how, because the Balis are Hindu, right? Am I
Mhm.
correct? So, but the rest of Indonesia is not practicing Hindus. So, is there a relationship between the prehistoric um, concepts of gender that continued on despite not onslaught, the various practices, beliefs, and religions that came in over the past 2,000 years, I guess.
It's actually quite interesting because you know some of my interviewees from Bali are actually not from Bali, but they are just moving to Bali because again with tourism, they were telling me that you know it is much easier to live as a waria or an LGBT member where you know they are actually using their identity to earn money, you know, by giving shows or you know to sex work. So a lot of my interviewees, I think, I am just thinking about my data sheet. A lot of them are, you know, Hindus, but there are a few ones too that are coming from outside the island, and they are only moving there because it is they are more free. They were telling me that they are hearing stories from their Waria friends outside Bali that you know it is much harder to exist and live as a Waria, whereas in Bali they are earning money because again tourism um, and it is not a Muslim island so yeah so it is actually part of why there are a lot of Warias and some of Warias moved to the island of Bali.
I wanted to ask as well, siguro to tag on to that, and
Yeah.
although there's still some other questions I see, but this is a very interesting talk. I just wanted to say, but when it comes to the island of Bali, did you just focus on the because it's big? Well, it's not so big, but it has other parts as well that aren't touristy, that aren't as much as touristy. So are the Warias also present there? Do they also, or are they? How are they also seen, or at least have you heard how they are viewed or how they live in those non-touristy areas part of Bali?
So the organization that I work with, where I actually lived for my fieldwork, was the capital of Bali, which is Denpasar. So I that's where I stayed for 5 weeks with a Balinese family host. Um, so a lot of them, you know, they go home in the capital city and then they actually go to the beaches. You know, if you go to Bali, there's Sanur, Kuta, or the other Gili, I don't know, I don't remember much, but there are Gili islands or something.
Yeah, the Guinea Islands. Yeah.
Yeah. I most of my interviewees are coming from those beaches. Tapos I actually meet them at the community organization because the organization actually wanted to be part of it. Um, but I also did participant observation sa Kuta Beach, where I did some of my interviewees, and when you do participant observation, I also volunteered there, just giving information or doing translation services. But yeah, a lot of them are finding work sa mga beaches sa Bali. But there are also a few areas where it's not a very touristy beach vibe area, but they also work as sex workers. But they were telling me that like for those areas though, it is much harder. Kasi daw, the people, when you are in a beach area, there are, a intermingling cultures and identities, and it's so hard to show some violence against them, right? Pero when it comes to those mga parang, suburbs, quiet places, some of the people there are, for the lack of a better term, nastier. They were telling me that sometimes, nahabol daw sila with a motorbike, or they are throwing water bottles, hurling water bottles at them while they are standing in the street, where they were telling me if they are in the beaches area, mas accepting daw because there's a lot of tourists in there, and they are you know it's more alive at night. So
That's a very interesting concept as well. So it's like and landscape and social relations intertwined with gender, with gender concepts as well, or how freely gender can be more fluid.
and one thing oh sorry yeah one thing to add is that because I work with sex workers, it's so hard to be like to do participant observation
Yeah.
while they are
Yeah.
because, they are they see me there, and sometimes that will deter them from getting a client or talking to someone. I had an experience while I was in Singapore, and I look Asian, and I was there, and I thought that I'll easily pass as someone from there, and I haven't even uttered a word, and one of them said, "You're not from here." And I was like, "How do you know?" And he was like, "Just the way that you carry yourselves and your mannerisms, and stuff like that." So I made sure that my presence in there will not deter them from getting a client or talking to someone or yeah, because that's their income, and when it is disrupted, I just don't feel okay with that. And also you can't do participant observation while they are doing sex work. So yeah.
That makes sense, and that I guess that's also one of the challenges that people who are studying sex workers. So it's both gender, it's both the labor economy that you're also looking at. So those are part of the challenge, and I think that's already another good paper that you can write about.
I do remember we were chased by the police one time in Singapore because as part of a participant observation, you guys there's an IKEA in the Philippines, right? There's an IKEA, the furniture store.
Now, yeah, I think it started.
Yeah. So I heard there are 2 IKEA bags strapped to my body that night, and we usually do community work paggabi, which is
Right.
that's where they do work in order to reach them. And there are like yung laman ng IKEA bag is basically just condoms. We call them bread bags or care packages. And one thing that I learned about Singapore, and it is through my conversation with academics, is that there is the illegal ring when it comes to prostitution, and then there is the free prostitution ring. So, and the legal one is heavily guarded by the police. So para hindi ma-disrupt, and they actually pay organizations like Project X going in there because they see those organizations as bringing information and disrupting yung yung vibe, for the lack of a better term. So one time they saw us walking, and we are just giving care packages, because for some of these individuals, they can't even afford, their basic needs and necessities when it comes to work. So that's condom, lube, or even wet wipes. And the police saw us, and we were just like running. And I was just so worried because I'm not from there. And the year that I got there was the year that they banned individuals without Singaporean passport, no, Singaporean, I don't know, PR cards or passport, not to. Have you guys heard about Pink Dot in Singapore? It's like their Pride Day, Pride Week in Singapore. And I actually went there early so I can just observe them, just to, that's how anthropology works, right? You usually observe for the next few days, look for um, for things, and then I think that year that's when they, I know, had a rule now if you have uh non-Singaporean passport or not a resident there, there's like a parameter where you can just observe, and if they check you, they will actually put you in jail or something like that. So
It's always very organized.
yeah, it is so organized. So my supervisor back then was, I'm not sure, maybe it's familiar for some of the archaeology people. I actually worked with Gregory Ford, who studied the Abu Gogo in Flores. And Greg was actually in Flores Island, that same fieldwork, and he was like, "Oh, just don't go there. You don't want to be, you don't want to be, pulong or something like that." So yeah, so definitely, you are challenged all of the time, and you are
Yeah.
tested.
Yeah, that's already a book already. Might be other questions as well.
Yes, I believe Sir Victor Paz has a question. If he's here.
Thank you, Kevin, for sharing your ideas and your research. I was just thinking, listening to what you were saying. Well, first, I have several questions. Of the Wakia concept, did you manage to track down its etymology and its origin? How long has that term been around in Bali?
I don't really know the exact year, but it is fairly recent.
Okay, so in the last couple of maybe 70s perhaps or 80s. Yeah.
Yeah, I am actually pulling from the works of Professor Tom Bellstorff,
Yeah.
which I actually met when I was in Singapore. He was one of the panels for a conference. So I am actually pulling a lot from his early studies, although his studies are actually focused on gay Indonesians. But yeah.
So then you also because you've observed and you've got to know them well. What is your sense of the moralist view about prostitution of any gender, right? It's okay at best. They have no choice. No kapit sa patalim. That kind of argument. But in the in the context of gender and gender, did you actually feel agency among them that this is the way that they can express their gender choice to be prostitutes?
Yes, but most of them actually wanted to be there.
Okay.
Which is interesting. But there are also a few
like you mentioned earlier, yes.
They don't have a choice. But like even from both of my Singaporean subjects and Indonesian Balinese subjects, a lot of them actually wanted to be there, and they are enjoying what they want. And I even asked them, if you are given the choice, because some of them, they were telling me that even working as a cashier or even as salon workers, they will not be accepted. And they were telling me that, yes, I will still do it. But so yeah, there is definitely agency for some of them. But again, a lot of them are.
Yes. But that's how complex humans are and human societies are. I mean, there's no one reason really. It's the entire thing. But then I was just wondering, listening to you very earnestly about, for example, at the end where the issue of detransitioning and then of course the phenomena of retransitioning. Could it be if we just change the way we see it, as with all rites of passage theory, the um, um, the frameworks that we use sometimes to synthesize the data, the liminality theory, which again transitions, it gives us a sense of a directional kind of progress of an individual's life. And therefore, every time there's a sense of like going back, it's like a backsliding or a conundrum. But surely and I've only read one or really just one book on gender, and that's Marilyn Saturn's book way back, no, way back, and that's it. But I've never really got deep into the theory. But listening to you now, it gives me this idea. Well, if we don't look at it as a trajectory, no, and that gender is always is negotiable and it's negotiated, and individuals as observed by those other frameworks, can have several genders in their lives and they can go back and forth. I know at least two people who will pass in that detransitioning. They were they were gay, then they decided they're not gay, and it was baffling for a lot of the other gay friends that we have. But it's not going to be baffling if we just look at gender then as moments in an individual's life, and then a person can have multiple, can have one, and can change and go back and forth, and which brings me again to in those definitions that you gave and in the description. Could it also be that you're describing two things: gender and gender choice, like transsexuals, and gender expressions such as like cross dressers and drag queens? Because my thinking, a cross dresser or a drag queen will not be 24/7 cross dressing or in a contest, right? So they will just be moments in a day, in a week or a day, right? And then so they will be tagging from wearing a suit or a barong and then high heels or whatever at night, whatever. So they will have. So will it be interesting to look at it as an expression rather than equal footing as definitely as gender defining? For example, I learned from you, which I wasn't really aware of, that a cross-dresser is a heterosexual. I thought that if you're a the most famous American cross-dresser is what's the name of that crazy guy who founded the FBI? That awful guy.
Hoover.
Hoover. No, J. Edgar Hoover is a well-known cross-dresser. And that guy is awful, macho, etc. But he's a cross-dresser. Now it makes sense that this guy is, but he most of the time is in his three-piece suit, right? But he has another life. So I was just thinking, those are just my comments about what I learned from your wonderful talk.
Thank you, Paul. Actually, yeah, there are different things when it comes to gender expression, gender identity, and there are people that when even I'm not sure. It's not a good example, but I'm not sure if all of you who are in the chat room have heard about the gingerbread man when it comes to gender studies. I can send a link later. But yeah, I totally agree, Paul, with your comments. And one thing I actually made sure when I was doing my interviews is I actually asked them what do they identify with. So that was actually my first question on the research, where I make sure that that they actually identify as Waria, because gender in itself is it's a spectrum, right? So you can occupy, some people occupy one space throughout their life, but a lot of individuals actually go from point A, point 5, point B, and then go back. So I actually made sure that they identify as Waria or trans, and I actually asked them to define what Waria means to them, or even trans, because the word transgender, again, it is a borrowed term from the West. So sometimes I think that is the beauty of borrowing, but also there is yung parang dangerous concepts when it comes to borrowing concepts and terms without actually cultural significance, because it erases sometimes yung cultural nuances when it comes to these experiences and the gender as a spectrum concept.
There was tacking onto that. There's also a question, and maybe this is related to Dr. Pas's talk, question. Meron bang internally motivated na gusto mag-transition to male but do not consider it as detransitioning but are retransitioning, i.e. a step forward rather than a step backward, and nakakabit sa fluidity sa gender identity. So siguro parang ganun nga yung going, identifying as whether male, female, whichever. Yes.
So interesting about detransitioning. I learned about the detransitioning through a conference. I think it's a social work conference where people are talking about LGBT and old age. And sometimes when it comes to those perspectives, like there are walang senior homes that only caters for LGBT. So sometimes if you are, and again, this goes again to the broader concept of the bathroom issue, where they were telling, I think it's Philip Rosario from Adelphi University, and Vanessa Faber from University of Washington, that published a book, but it's not an academic book because halos that year wala pang masyado about detransitioning, where they are doing a photographic analysis of how, if you are part of the community, how you age and what experiences or differences of experiences you experience kapag nag-age ka as a trans or as part of the LGBT community. So I lost my train of thought there. Pero the concept that when it comes to, I think he's from social work, if I remember correctly, that sometimes when you are an aging trans or LGBT, there's not much options for you. So meron daw mga experiences when it comes to senior homes that they have to go back to their male form or presenting as male because they will be bullied in those settings. So yeah, I wish there will be more actual, academic research on detransitioning. But again, it is such a muddy topic right now because it is very politicized by some.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was also thinking that because aging as a topic is also something that's not really talked about, because or at least we're only starting to talk about it because when you mentioned the senior homes, I don't know, is it practiced in Bali as well, or are there what is the common practice when it comes to aging people? Do they live in their homes, in their biological homes? Do they go to a senior home? Yeah.
For a lot of Warias, hindi sila sa biological home or the home where they grew up. But there were a few mentions. I had this interview with Vanita. She's a Chinese Balinese. Na sinasabi niya that she is actually working in sex work because she is trying to earn money. So the family, she doesn't want to live with the family because she was like, oh, they will not accept me and I have to go back to being a male form. And yung concept of maybe I'm getting it wrong, utang na loob, she said that I don't want them to actually care for me just so when I die, they will not respect my wishes. So she is actually trying to earn money to go to a home care when she gets old or frail. So I think for some, if you have the money, just like in other communities in Asia, they actually go there because no one will care for them. But for some of them, it's actually yung parang choice of kin choice, yung hindi by blood. So it is their sex work community that earn that tries to help them when they get old. I'm not sure if you guys are watching Post by FX, yung parang ganong scenario, the ballroom culture of the New York So they have like the houses per se. Like I'm not sure if you guys are remember or watching Legendary from HBO, that they have like these houses that they create for themselves, and there's the mother figure, and then the children, and that's how they navigate their lives up to old age. So I got a message and they said, I wonder if you are familiar with Paul Atienza. We actually follow each other on Twitter. Yeah, I do know Paul through social media, but I haven't talked to him. So
Oh, Dr. Paz has a question.
No, I just want. Sorry if I missed it, Kevin. But why? So you chose Bali and then you chose Singapore for your ME study. So were you doing a comparative and if you have Waria in Bali, what was the term or equivalent for it in Singapore?
So yes, so my background sa Andrew is in comparative anthropology po. So that's how my supervisor, trained me. So in Singapore, there's actually no Hokkien or any other language that they use the word trans women. And I think it's still they were colonized by the British. So a lot of the things that you see in Singapore is very westernized. So they are okay with just borrowing that term. So I did research, I did read the literature, I talked to them. They call themselves trans women or tranny, which is derogatory in the West if you call these individuals tranny. But they are calling themselves just trans women. One of my Singaporean friend that I asked, I mentioned in the beginning of the class, is the word agua. I'll type it in the chat. But she said that if you actually translate it to English, it literally means change gender. So
Are they mostly Chinese Singaporeans, South Asian Singaporeans, Filipino? I mean, in terms of their in their ancestry, what do in your observation?
A lot of them are Malay.
Most of them.
Most of them. Yeah.
Which is for me, that's interesting because in Singapore, as you know, more or less there's a informal caste system, and the poorest generally will be the South Asian types, no? And if this is simply an economic thing, then you will observe more of them with South Asian ancestry. But no, like you mentioned, so that's another good argument for why this is not simply an economically driven industry or major.
Yeah, one thing that I noticed where I was there, and they were telling me too, there are 5 red lights district in Singapore, and depending on where you go, they are heavily, concentrated based on your ethnic background. So they were telling me if you go to Orchards, which is the flashy shopping district, dun daw makikita lahat ng Filipino sex workers. So they call it the 4 floors of whores in Orchards. So they were telling me that if I wanted to do more research on not even just trans women sex workers, go to Orchards. They were like, you're gonna find the Filipino community sex work there. Tapos, I did most of my work in Little India. Which not Little India, but close there in Hindu roads, not Desker Road, but Hindu Road. So most of them, those are immigrant, temporary visa, where they go to Singapore to work as sex workers. And then they were telling me that most of their clientele are also temporary foreign workers from Bangladesh or Sri Lanka. Tapos there is the other one in Changi Airport, where they were telling me that's where the Chinese sex workers are namamalagi po. And then they're...
But you didn't actually see them. I mean, you didn't go and have a look at them.
No, but most of my participant observation and my interviewees are situated in Little India.
Little India, but most of the sex workers are Malay.
Malay, yeah. And I think it's also dependent on the organization that we work with. I work with with Project Next, and they were the one who were sourcing interviewees for me, and they are screening them. So I think it depends on the organization that you work with. Kung ano yung parang
Pinifilter nila for you.
yeah.
Although that's an interesting way rin na method, because of course it's also partnership. So eventually, once you, I guess you're going to continue this research. Am I right? Or am I correct?
We are hoping to
Sa food na siya eh.
we
Oh,
are
food and sexuality. That's a new niche.
No, I was talking to my supervisor. Give me 3 months. I just we are hoping to publish the transitioning one, but my current study is actually looking at Filipino food and how recipes travel through lolas and titas, and how the landscape plays a role in that, particularly New York City and Edmonton, where I'm currently based. So yeah, it is very different. There is actually, I removed something from the slides, that there's an epilogue that said, I am wrapping this project, bye. So I think, I've been working on this project since 2015, since I was an undergrad. And there is that trope in anthropology. When you were young, you wanted to study outside cultures or culture that is not your own. And then as you grow older, you actually wanted to go back to the community. I don't know. That's what I feel with all of the Filipino anthropology friends that I know here. That at a certain point, you actually wanted to study your own because, native ethnography, sometimes it is not as respected as the other forms of ethnography. But there is that push that there is something good about native ethnography when you study your own, or auto ethnography or something like that. So I wanted to study actually Filipino communities for my PhD.
Yeah, I could definitely relate to that for sure.
Yeah, as I think a lot of people also here can also relate to that. And in fact, I guess this is going to be the closing question, since we are transitioning to you are also transitioning to the concept of food. When you talk about lolas, recipes of lolas and titas, does that also include the gay community or the lolas who are also bakla or something?
I think right now we haven't figured it out, but we are interested. Maybe this will not answer your question, on how like Filipino recipes travel without even writing them, and they are gatekept through oral histories and stuff like that. So the project is that I will actually dine in with the families. That's the ethnographic cover, to see how they cook, and how they substitute. Like for example, there's no pet chai in Canada, so when you make sinigang, you use bok choy, or something like that. So we are interested in how it travels, and the concept of diasporic homecoming, from Dr. Martin Manalan's son, that when you eat a food, even though you are not in the Philippines, it transports you back. So like for example, I had my childhood in the Philippines and then we moved to Canada. When I don't remember much, but when I eat a certain food, it transports me back to my childhood memories. So that is a good one. You know what? I'll write that in my notes because I'm meeting my supervisor on Thursday. About
Good luck with that.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I think we're coming up on time, so I think we have time for one last question, and I think we'll take it from the chat. And this question comes from Sir Mix Kanilao. And he asks, with your experience in Singapore and its multicultural communities, did you observe de facto gentrification from neighborhoods? He asked because you talked about earlier how about certain transgender communities being found in specific areas, specific malls, etc.
That's an interesting question. I guess I will answer that, but most of the other red light district that that they mentioned, I did not do research, so I am pulling a lot from the narrative experience. Because again, I only stayed there for 4 weeks because it's so expensive to do research. I thought it will be cheaper in Singapore. It ended up not. So I think yes, but again, I don't want to give wrong information. So yeah, Dr. Candelo, I may need to come back to that question because but yeah, it's a hesitant yes for now, just so I don't get into trouble.
Uh,
Okay. Thank you very much. And that's actually a good chance for people to, if you have more questions or you want more conversations going on with Kevin, you can also email him. So he put his email on the presentation, but maybe you can also put your email in the chat if it's okay. So people can, I'm sure there's a lot of people who are interested in talking with you about this topic because it was a great talk. And we also look forward to the information that you will be bringing regarding food. Good thing that there are a lot of us who are also interested about food. So maybe we can also invite you again to give a talk
I just wanted to say thank you. I promised myself that this year that I will do more work or connecting with the Filipino community because it is such refreshing to see an audience that is mostly Filipino. I usually do my presentations where I am the only Filipino in the room. So when they offered me to teach at UP Baguio, I was excited. Even though, it has its own challenges. Hi, Elle. But but yeah, I am so excited that you guys invited me here and I see some of my students here. Kahit puyatan, it's actually worth it to be part of the UP system and to actually work with and know some Filipino anthros because most of the people that I work with and even my supervisors, there's no Filipino anthro in my department. So it's very refreshing to see and to work with people and just to talk with people. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Well, as well, there's we have JJ who's also from working now in the Philippines, but came from Canada, and other people who are coming in from different places as well. Michelle Eusebio, who is working on food and prehistory. So she's
so interesting. Yeah. A lot of the people, I think I know them through social media, like Dada Dogbot or
Yes.
or some of them, and then because of pandemic, and I'm not saying that there is something good
It's a silver
coming out
lining.
from the pandemic, but if there is no pandemic, I wouldn't have met Elle or have given a talk here because I have to go home. And I haven't been.
Hi, Kevin. So your dissertation is about food? It's more.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. That's good to hear.
Yeah, I work with Helen Valianatos, who studies mothering, and stuff like that. So yeah, if there are anyone from Canada here, I'm more than happy to give you a tour of Edmonton. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Kevin, for that wonderful talk. I actually really learned a lot, and there's a lot to think about, especially for everyone, whether it's for gender in the current times or gender probably in the prehistoric times. So that's something that we can, or in the recent history. So that's something that we can look forward to. Thank you again to Elle Lim for introducing Kevin to us and for also doing the introduction earlier. Thank you as well to all the participants. Next week, our Binalot Talks will shift from 2 hours ahead. It will be held at 2 p.m. to accommodate our speaker, who is Dr. Andres Lurch, I think, who will be talking about his research done in Camiguin Island and the folk tales of Camiguin Island, with the title of his talk being The Untold Stories of Camiguin Island. So Please watch out for that, and we'll see you next week at 2 p.m. Thank you again, and you can visit Kevin's website. He put it on the chat, www.kevinlaksamana.com.
Yeah,
All
good
right.
night from Canada. Bye.
Good night. Thank you so much. Have a
Thanks,
great day.
Kevin. Good night.